This is my poetry presentation, and I'm Jacob Brookins in Miss Hayes English 102 class from February 20th, 2024, except this is my revision, so it's March 22nd, a month later. And then my introduction. The Raven was published in the New York Evening Mirror on January 29th, 1845, by Edgar Allan Poe. The overall message of the poem is how mournful people can be about losing someone or something, and how people never forget loved ones, and the pain will always be there. Some background and references are that Edgar Allan Poe was born on the 19th of January, 1809 in Boston, Massachusetts. He died on the 7th of October, 1849 in Baltimore, Maryland. He was born to Elizabeth Arnold Poe and David Poe Jr. His father and mother were both actors, but they died before Poe was 3. John and Frances Allen adopted him, and he lived a wealthy lifestyle because his dad was a tobacco exporter. He went to the best schools and later the University of Virginia. Poe accumulated some gambling debt and was forced to leave the university because his father wouldn't pay his debt. He went to the military and he tried very hard to get kicked out as he had a lot of infractions and he never showed up to his classes, even though he scored like the highest on his like math and stuff. He just didn't show up. Um, yeah, and then he also made poems like Tamerlane and Al Araf, but was forced to leave later in his life because of insignificant funds. He then moved in with his aunt, Maria Clem, and her daughter Virginia in Baltimore. He married Virginia in 1836, who was 13 at the time. She died from tuberculosis a few years later in 1847. Poe was known to have severe depression and alcoholism, but spiraled even deeper when his wife Virginia died. He was found semi-conscious on October 3rd, 1849, and 4 days later he died in the hospital. And then Poets.org says evidence by medical practitioners who reopened the case has shown that Poe may have died from rabies, been suffering from rabies. And reading the poem. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volumes of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, "only this, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with a many a flit and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore, not the least obeisance, obeisance, I think it's obeisance, made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. But the raven still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird, a bust, and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore, meant in croaking nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. "Wretch," I cried, "thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." "Prophet," said I, "thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempest sent or tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." "Prophet," said I, "thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by God that we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my palace door. Take thy beak out of my heart, out from my heart. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws a shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. Alright, and then paraphrase. This piece relates back then to how quickly people you care about can fade from your life, and the pain that could make people go insane. The narrator states, from my book Surcease of Sorrow, Sorrow for the Lost Lenore, in line 10, the narrator is mourning over Lenore, someone he lost, and the narrator also says, though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art sure no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Lines 45, 6, and 7. He's slowly going insane because a raven comes in and he instantly is aghast and thinks it's from the underworld. And it all relates to current events in history. A lot of people don't believe in signs, they just believe stuff to be a coincidence. They're also more stable than they were in the 1800s, so the poem fits because people still lose loved ones and can spiral into despair like Poe did. And I also didn't read the whole poem because it's really long. I cut a few out, so if you want to read the whole thing, you can go and see. And then some themes in The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe is hopelessness and lingering pain or grief. The narrator slowly starts to lose his sanity. He says, "Wretch," I cried, "thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he has sent thee." The narrator calls the bird a wretch and thinks God sent angels to him or something. And another theme could be losing a loved one like Lenore. The narrator says, respite nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff, this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. So not specifically losing a loved one, but like how it is losing a loved one, like the stuff you'll face. And he remembers Lenore and either wants the raven to forget Lenore or he wants to forget Lenore himself. He just can't forget her, when you lose a loved one. And another theme may be death, the underworld, and the afterlife. And the narrator writes, "Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." And from what I understand, night's Plutonian shore is like the border between the world of the living and the underworld. And there's a few correlations to the underworld in this piece. And then some literary elements. A metaphor in The Raven compares two things that aren't usually correlated with each other. And the narrator says, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. He's comparing dying embers with ghosts. And another thing that was found is a hyperbole when the narrator says, "Open here, I flung the shutter when with a many foot and flutter." Line 37. A lot of imagery was also found, but only one will be used, where the narrator says, "And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws a shadow on the floor." Lines 105 and 106. And you just imagine the shadows and evil eyes, and that's why I picked it. And then rhymes are all throughout the poem. He structured it so the first, third, and fifth line, last words of the lines, rhyme with each other, or the second, fourth, and sixth lines rhyme with each other. So when the narrator says, "Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore, though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quote the raven, nevermore. Poe, lines 43 through 48. And then the last words, war, shore, and nevermore, all rhyme. Even more literary elements. The biggest symbol of this whole piece is the raven. The narrator says, "Wretch," I cried, "thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore." Quote the raven, nevermore. Lines 81 through 84. The narrator is telling the bird to forget about Lenore and get out of his memories of Lenore, but the bird says nevermore, symbolizing that the narrator will never forget about Lenore and will always be haunting him. The raven is symbolizing Poe's remembrance of Lenore and how he'll never forget, even if he wants to forget her. And then all these terms help to enhance the depth of the poem and all the layers that you can pull away. It also makes it easier to imagine in your mind, and and those terms are meant to get the reader thinking and have them be able to take away more than what's just said on the surface. The mood of the poem is dreary and reminiscent. He's upset and panicked about the raven and is bringing up thoughts about Lenore that he'll never forget. The mood or tone is definitely affected by what words the author uses and the poetic devices he uses. One line that helps set the tone is, "Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary." Line 1. Dreary, weak, and weary all describe the tone that he's setting. Then the narrator can't forget about Lenore, which he brings up to the bird when the raven says nevermore. The narrator says, "Respite, respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore," line 82, and those both help to understand the mood or tone of this piece. The tone helps to set the theme by almost painting a picture in your mind, and that sets the theme up. And then poem patterns. Again, the poem pattern throughout the whole poem is rhyming the last word of the first, third, and fifth line, and rhyming the second, fourth, and sixth line last words. Like when the narrator says, "And the silken sad and certain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terror never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, 'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door.' This is it. This it is, and nothing more." Lines 13 through 18. In that example, the second, fourth, and sixth lines rhyme. Before, door, and more all rhyme. The pattern affects the poem by having it go very smoothly. If you were to try and recite the poem out loud, it would rhyme and be very smooth if you took your time with it, like I did not. The point of view is put into a first-person point of view. The narrator says, "Thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terror never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating." Line 14. The narrator uses me and I in those two lines, showing that it is in first person. Anyone could be the narrator. Whoever fits the scene in your mind could be the narrator. He chose not to have a specific narrator because it is better not to have someone that people can look to, but they can put anyone in the narrator's shoes that they see will fit the job. With different narrators, people might think different things about the person and try to figure out like their background or why it's that person, but there's no background of an unnamed narrator except for what the author gives, which is why it's first person. And he doesn't have a narrator. And then personal connections. I can't relate to this poem too much because my life is not sad. I'm active. I have people that love me. But I can relate to how the narrator was having a dreary day and the bird made it a lot worse. And I have bad days that turn worse too. I also mourn loved ones, but I'm not going insane. And I can be at ease not remembering them. And I chose the poem because I love it, and I discovered it last year in English for a project, and I loved it so much I decided to do it again, although it is very long. And then my favorite two lines are, "Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor." Paragraph. No, that should not be paragraph. That should be line 14. Paragraph 14. I like this part because there are a lot of words that kind of don't make sense, but when you look into it, it's cool the depth that's in those two lines. Because seraphim, that's something. Unseen censer, air grew denser, tufted floor, footfalls tinkled. And then, have you guys ever heard this poem? No. Have you ever heard this poem? What's your favorite thing about this poem and why? And then there's my works cited.